This episode includes discussions of potentially triggering topics such as abuse, trauma, addiction, and other sensitive subjects. These topics may be difficult for some listeners. Please listen with care and prioritize your well-being as needed. Hello and welcome to Rabbit Hole Reflections. I'm so glad you found us. Here at RHR, we explore transformative journeys through life's deepest challenges. I'm your host, Lisa Van Slyke. Each week, I'll guide you through powerful conversations with guests that illuminate paths from chaos to calm. Join us as we discover how our most difficult moments can become the foundation for profound growth. Through these raw, honest discussions, we'll uncover the wisdom and resilience that emerges when we face our darkest moments.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Rabbit Hole Reflections. I am your curator, Lisa Van Slyke, here on our journey down the rabbit hole. I do have our guest, Joshua Jones, here with me. Joshua is the driving force behind TUPOS, T-U-P-O-S, a global movement for faith-driven entrepreneurs. He's on a mission to empower entrepreneurs to transition from business operations to true visionaries who create generational impact. Whether through strategic masterminds, high-level coaching, or faith-centered leadership, Joshua is committed to helping entrepreneurs become the example, not just in business, but in life. Welcome, Joshua. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, great to be here, Lisa. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So why don't we just go ahead and dive into your rabbit hole? I'm excited to hear about it.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Would you, would you like to take the piece of cake that makes you small or the piece of cake that makes you tall?
Off we go. I think being small I'm tired of playing small. So let's go for being tall.
Let's go for big. Awesome. Yeah. So as we jump down this rabbit hole today and some of the stuff I'm going to share, we're going to touch on a lot of, what people don't want to talk about. Sexual promiscuity, a lot of lust, suicidal thoughts that are attached to that, relationships that are set ablaze as a result of that. We're going to go into all kinds of fun stuff today. We'll just see what the Father brings up. But yeah, for me, man, it's been a wild journey. Lisa, I started this journey off, I think it was about 7 years old. My first real recollection of it, like powerfully, was at 8. I had sex for the first time at 8 years old. If you can imagine, when I was 10 years old, my birthday present was a 12-pack of condoms. And so my experience as a young man was radically different, probably than what most people put on as their mask. Now, obviously, this isn't not where I walk now. There's a lot of great stuff we'll get to at the end of this. But for now, this rabbit hole goes very, very deep. So there was something familial in this I didn't understand in the beginning. And maybe this will help us pinpoint the base of this hole. This is about as deep as we'll go. So back in my lineage, right? One of my grandparents happened to be involved in the 60s and in the 70s in a thing that today we call child pornography.
Okay.
And this was something I didn't discover until this grandparent passed. And it really, really connected some dots for me with the rabbit holes I had to go down in order to learn the lessons to come up out of that pit. And yeah, it was really dark. I mean, it was everything from, I was looking at, I remember early on, I would see, pornography in the mags, right? We'd call them booby mags for you guys that are listening, and it was like, oh my gosh, there's boobies, or, it was something that was so innate inside of me as a man. And I didn't know this. Again, I didn't have great examples growing up. That God bless them, love them, love my parents deeply today. Can't say I did so much back then.
Right.
But the examples were not such that I understood what was happening. So I had this innate desire as a man, being born, to procreate. Right. And there were certain things that just felt right. And without those guardrails, without that example, I was all in. And that's been my personality. So as I go through some of these stages, you'll see, like, oh, wow, he went all in. Yeah, because that's what I do. I'm all in or I'm all out. So let's go all in on the rabbit hole, shall we?
Yes, let's do it.
So after this first experience, and I won't give all the details because they do kind of seem gory and probably not appropriate for a lot of the listeners. don't want to give a bad taste here. It's just experience. But I was very promiscuous, again, from single digits on. So about the age of 10 is where it really started to rock in. You know how it goes. You start getting all the hormones was something. And again, this probably was all built upon the contributing factors, right? I was a latchkey kid. You know, it was like grow up and be an adult, but I'm 10.
Yes.
Take care of yourself, make your own stuff. You know, and there was a lot of discipline I was being taught, and I was corrected in my house was very much corporal punishment with my dad. So it was big time ass whoopings with the belt, naked bare bottom thrown against the wall. And again, I love my dad to this day, but they got to know some of the details.
Right.
So was very physically fit, had a great frame, you know, was very blessed with that. So it all seemed to jive well. And so I ran with it. And man, it took me on a heck of a journey. By the time I was 13, at that time I identified it with Catholicism. Not that
Right.
matters here or there, but about the age of 13 is where I kind of said, to heck with all this, forget it. I'm done with the nonsense. I see a bunch of hypocrisy. I really don't see any good examples. And I was really in this dark space of lust, and nobody could help me at all. In fact, I was more encouraged than I was prevented from this path. So I go through the next 7 years as an atheist, and this is where the rabbit hole goes deep, deep, deep.
Let's go.
By the time I was 14, the track or the cadence of masturbation was somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 14 times a day. I was watching this much pornography by then. And back then it was like you could go to the BitTorrent sites. You could download full high quality, 1080p back then was like, whoa. And it was full on porn.
Right.
And of course, it was free for me. And so I was all in it. In fact, I carried this all the way into my first marriage. So if that tells you something, right? Rabbit holes. So I'm dealing with this thing of porn. I'm trying to find the outlets. I'm still doing great, fairly great in school. I'm involved in all the sports, but all the talk, all the mental, all the words that were happening, and all the friends I had, and I'll quote is to go out there and enjoy yourself to the max. So I did. In these 7 years of atheism, I went into the Army. I mean, my high school life was absolutely riddled with sex. I remember there were times and places where me and my buddies would be all about, hey, we got to get the virgins or something like that. I mean, again, really dark, And back then it wasn't dark to me. It was just the thing. This is kind of
accepted.
It was accepted. It was encouraged.
Yeah.
And and as long as you weren't into drugs or doing something illegal on campus or fighting, it's like the world is your oyster. Like, okay, good. So I get out of high school, going to the Army. And man, I wound up, this took me to a place where it was real dark. It was in Fort Benning, Georgia. So I spent a year, almost a year and a half there. This was good for me. Right. As you can imagine, I'm like,
I've been there. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Let's go. Yeah. So for all the veterans, you have this experience. It's like, it's there. You have money, you have time, and you have a group that's going to go. So now I was fully backed into everything I was doing. Wound up hooking with some other soldier's wife while he was on deployment. And that was probably the deepest, darkest point of my pit there. Now, ultimately, I separated from the service. But during that time, I had gotten me a sugar daddy. I was drinking probably 30 pack a day. And I mean that because I was capable physically of doing it. Not for too much longer. I probably would have died. But somehow some divine intervention got in there and was like, nope, it's time for you to go. So I separated from the Army and back to California. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to get on my own 2 feet here. I got to start getting out of this pit. I started realizing there was something wrong with what was going on. And I would hear people throughout my journey from time to time come and tell me things like, hey, you should probably not do that. Or
right.
Maybe there's a better way. And for me, it was like, well, F you, right? You're not me. Who are you? And most of that would come from hypocritical examples. And so it was really hard for that to actually break through and resonate in my soul, right? They couldn't be honest where they were at. Their marriages looked like crap. They were always depressed, sick, and broke, and like, come on, man, what are you trying to really help me out? Their kids were a mess, and they're over here trying to counsel. Like, get out of here. I remember running into that so much. But anyway, so I ran the opposite direction.
Okay.
Yeah, I wouldn't say this was the deepest part of my journey, but the idea that I could get out there. I mean, I was stripping before men. I was stripping before women. I had done a couple of parties. I was dating a stripper. Now, of course, I dated a stripper when I was in the Army.
Yeah.
You know, again, no shame. Everybody's on their journey.
Right.
This is not a shame game. What I found is so that all of this that I'm telling you, actually, a lot of it, I wasn't even able to share up until a couple of years ago. Right. And that's why I appreciate what you're doing here with this podcast, is because you kind of got to go back down there and actually reflect and get some hindsight. Right. So while I was an atheist, my hindsight was pretty shitty. It just wasn't great. It was like, well, let's just keep doing that. It feels good. Particularly the female strippers, and they were just, you know, I was like one of the very few male strippers in this cohort, if you will, and they were broken. I couldn't see it then, but they were just so broken, and all of us, we were so broken. We were trying to fill this void, and nobody knew what it was. So if we could fill it with money, if we could fill it with drugs and alcohol, if we could fill it with just more promiscuity and trying new things and going deeper with things and getting further off the edge, then that's what we were doing.
Yeah.
You know, and it's kind of like any pit you go down, you know, you can keep digging. And I found that out quite well. Thank God I didn't, I think I got one VD out of the whole thing in my entire experience, which thank the Lord I was in the Army for. Yeah, they gave me one shot and a couple of pills, and it's like the ramrod that I did not like. That was not a fun experience. I'd never had it done before.
Yeah.
And so it was like even worse because I had, you know, old gruff dude doing it. It wasn't like, hey, I was excited about it. It was like, hey, hold it. And it's like 1, 2, you don't count to 3.
Brutal.
We ram on 2. Thanks for the warning.
Right.
Oh my goodness. I had explored about as much as I could. I was into pretty much the breaking of every rule I've ever even heard of at that point. I had explored as much of the rabbit hole as I could possibly explore. So at the age of 20, I'm taking this entrepreneurial route, taking that sales acumen and putting it into my own business. Mm-hmm. And I take a friend from San Jose all the way down to SoCal, and we just in Anaheim, and we just basically go to this business convention, and we're like, okay, we're going to do business together, bro. And like, we're, you know, high off our ass driving down there. It's not any great thing, except we're like going on along. It was just like a joyful journey for us. Okay. We get there, we do this business thing. I'm like bored out of my gourd. I'm so bored. And I'm seeing these guys that are multimillionaires. Like there was great examples. There were younger guys and gals that were running the race, like as an entrepreneur. And I just really appealed to me. So it started to pivot my thinking away from the rabbit hole I had been stuck in, right, to another potential path.
Okay.
And so like Peter Rat or, you know, Peter Cottontail, whichever one you like, I go bouncing the other way. But on Sunday is where that really hit. All of a sudden, one of these guys got up and started preaching.
Oh, okay.
And I was like, well, this is different. Now, again, I'm still an atheist at the time. I'm right at the tail end, clearly, as I'm telling the story. That's when all of a sudden I begin to think differently, like, oh, I'm actually in a hole. And there's a reason I can't get out. And all of a sudden that became my reason. And I received this altar. I had this big breakdown moment. My buddy was like, you're crazy. You're nuts. And I'm like, dude, I'll die in that, because I thought that was going to be the end of it all, but it wasn't. So I go and I, give my life to Christ and whatnot to this altar call. And then for the next 10 years of my race, I'm still addicted to all this stuff. Mm-hmm. I'm still drinking like a fish. Yeah. I'm still smoking like crazy. You know, I'm married, you know, and I did wind up getting married. And so I wasn't out screwing around, which that was kind of like my big rock was, hey, you need to, but I was still all into porn. So might as well been the same thing. So I'd be down in the basement in between playing video games. I'm off, you know, doing my due, and back we go. And so even though I had a little bit of hindsight on that pit I was in, I had hit a peak and went right back into another pit.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's the beauty in exposing and reflecting on the holes we've gone down into, is because some of these details, you know, even though we go into another pit, there is some hindsight available. There's some power available using it, but certainly exposing it and being honest about it. Moving back.
That's a lot, and I know you're not finished, so keep going.
So I go through this marriage, and at this time, you know, I think I'd spent the first 10 years of my race as a believer just in the Bible, like nonstop. I was super hungry. I was like, oh my gosh, there's this void. Now all of a sudden I'm filling it, and I feel like I'm being filled.
Good.
For the first time in my life. And I thought that was great, but I'm still doing all these things. So I hadn't come to the next pivot where I could examine my actual fruit, honestly.
Okay.
Right. And that's kind of what my reflections were when I share, particularly when I share in my veteran experience and when I share inside of my marriage experience, reflections of these pits. I saw that there was a lot of bad fruit still. So I wound up, unfortunately, going through a divorce. When I say unfortunately for the kids. If there's anything drugs and alcohol promiscuity will produce in a relationship, it is isolation and ultimately a separation. Right? Two can't become one earnestly in a relationship without honesty, without the truth, without full exposure in the light. And I didn't know that at the time. So I was one of those guys where it's like, well, there's the door. You know, you don't like the pivot I'm taking in my life. And I believed at that time, you know, God was trying to pivot me away from what I was doing, lead me kind of out of that pit, one more step to another peak. And my children, as a result, you know, it was lied to them that I was a danger to them and all of these things. And it started to break. It took me down another rabbit hole.
Right.
A whole different one, too. Right. Because now this wasn't all about sex, but all those things came back up. So after the divorce, what happened? Went right back into the pit. I'm at the strip clubs. I'm doing all the things I was doing before. I mean, heck, I'm hooking up with strippers. I'm like, hey, well, I'm not married, YOLO. And I kind of regressed a little bit.
You went back to what you knew was comfortable.
There you go. There you go. I went back to my comfort zone. I knew I could play that game, and I was good at it. A little too good at it. I'll never forget the time that I actually officiated a wedding once. If you can imagine.
No judgment.
I'm no ordained minister or whatever by the world standard here, but I officiated a wedding once and go off to the strip club with mixing of the lustful desires of the flesh. These were my experiences. And it was so comfortable that any opportunity that I had, I would go right back to it. Life got hard, I'd go right back to it.
Right.
Oh, you know, I'd find a way, you know, and as I started into my professional career after the divorce, there were some, you know, there's some really dark places inside of there too.
Yeah.
You know, I gotta go get these rocks off, go find a public restroom, go find a restroom in the office that has a lock on the door, make sure nobody's there. I mean, just all the things that surround and have surrounded me operating in that pit, in that rabbit hole. So, golly, that got fairly bad, and it took a kind of come to Jesus moment, if you will, you know, to the fact that I was lying the whole time. That was a big revelation for me, because as one that was hyper judgmental and was, you know, especially when I was in that dark space, oh man, it was so easy to just judge everyone, everything, and just excuse because I am who I am. And we see a lot of that kind of in society right now going on. You know, just, well, I'm gonna while out and be whatever I be. And I mean, we got swinging dicks in parades. That's just weird with kids there. For me now, looking back, reflecting, my granddad used to be involved with things like that. And I was like, whoa, this is way deeper than just, oh, look what I'm going through. Because in that time, that's all it was, right?
Right.
Yeah, oh, the hell I'm going through, the hell I had put myself in, frankly. Didn't know any better. So I did the best that I thought, anyway, that I could with my first 2 kids. And by the time they were 7 and 8, we then began this alienation path, and I went and got remarried after the fact. We wound up with 2 more. So between us, we've got 5 kids all in all, which I absolutely love because it's like an iterative development process, right? The idea of reflecting on the rabbit hole. Okay, you're going to have another one. Yeah. Something's going to come up. And so it's like, all right, I got all this ammo sitting here ready to go. How do I apply it? And examine what was that fruit from those pits, because there's gold there.
There really is. There really is.
Yeah. I never looked at it that way before. So rather than seeing value in the experiences, I just stuff them down and, regulate my emotions around, or hide them, or mask it, or flat out lie about it. That was most of it. And it wasn't until, like I said, he knocked on the door here a couple of years ago and was like, you're a liar. Like, what do you mean I'm a liar? Because I had still been I was still drinking like a fish. I mean, I would go back and forth with things, right? Like,
right.
With the porn, it would be one of those, I'm super ashamed of what I'm doing. Like when I was with the stripper, there was no shame whatsoever. Like, you don't like it, kick rocks. And this guilt and the isolation that comes from hiding it, ultimately. Because once I would do one thing, it would cascade into the next thing, right? Into the next thing. And then that would start to spill out into, lives beyond my own. And I didn't know back then, but I really didn't care back then, right? So I think that was part of the transition out of my stint as an atheist, was I just simply didn't care. And it took a long time for me to develop a cadence of reflection that would cause me to give a shit, to actually care. That was monumental for me. I got around thought leaders like Jordan Peterson, for example, talking about responsibility. I think about a year of listening to him, and it was just like, okay, I'm black and blue in the face. Leave me alone for a minute. I'm good. Let me go explore some more. I'll come back around. I hate the name drop.
Oh, it's okay. Somebody can look them up. Yeah. It could be a resource for somebody listening to the show. So it's okay to name drop.
Okay, very cool. Very cool. Yeah, I mean, there's so many of them. I won't list them out here, but that one was very pivotal because it gave me the idea of responsibility.
Yeah.
That was my key element there. And my time in the service, I just did a podcast where I was sharing my experience. My service experience was very different than most veterans. Very, very different. And I respect the heck out of every veteran that goes through this. But there was one of those instances, and this is just recent, right, where I got to expose something that I hadn't shared before. And there was an immense amount of power that came from that. This power of okay, I'm untouchable. Anybody that's inside of that space, what do? You go for domination. You go for control, because if I can dominate and I can control, then I'm not the victim, even though up in here, it's still a victim. Yeah. So it's just like yet another layer of masking that I had encountered.
It's like a silent movie that constantly goes in your head, like you're trying everything to avoid it or to run away from it or whatever, but it's still continually playing in your head. And it's a lot. It's a lot to try to sit down with it and unpack all of it, because, everybody starts at, in childhood, but you have very definitive evidence of when you're started in childhood.
Yeah, that's a good call out. I don't want anybody to feel shamed. And I won't name drop it. When I was young, when I was about somewhere between 5 and 7, that's why I said the first instance I can really remember, detailed, was at 8. And of course, looking at mags and stuff, but there was some abuse period in there, right? There was some trauma that took place, to your point. It's there was something that happened, and I didn't know this till later in my walk, but what I was reading when I was reading the scripture was something to the effect of, this enemy's been after you since your birth. And it resonated with me because I was like, oh, there's something more I can go dig into and reflect on. So I started having conversations with my parents, like just over the last 3-4 years, having really like sit down, like, hey, look, I don't want to judge you at all. And so we went around with this a few rounds. And ultimately, it came to light that when I was young, elementary school, I was staying in daycare before I go to school. And in this daycare, there was a couple of us boys in the beginning, but there were several of us over time. And we were put on a fold-out couch in a garage, and told to go to sleep, lay down and play with each other. Lay down and play with each other. I'll never forget that phrase. Just lay down and play with each other. And guess what we did? We laid down and played with each other sexually. And that was like groundbreaking. It started to open up things like, there was all this trauma that had been suppressed, and try to make improvements. But guess what? There was still that little corner sitting in there that it hadn't been exposed. So as soon as I think everything's good, I have open heart surgery, I close it all back up, infection comes back. And so that's my reflection on all this journey is that there's a place where we can operate in freedom and power that just simply requires going down this journey like you're taking us now, which I appreciate.
Wow, that is a lot to take in. And first of all, thank you so much for being vulnerable and sharing all of that with us. I think a lot of healing starts when even if there's shame or fear wrapped around us telling and sharing our story, it's so cathartic to just be able to start talking about it, whether it's with a trusted friend or a therapist or something. Just start telling your story and getting out there. So thank you so much for being vulnerable and sharing all of that with us. And the second thing I need to say is, oh my God, a lot of us have sexual trauma from our past. I remember a very small glimpse into something that was inappropriate. I don't know how far it went after that, but I would say about 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, I found out that the person that I have that memory about actually went to jail for pedophilia. And my mind is still not ready to unlock everything because I'm like, you know what? I'm okay with what I remember. I don't need to unpack anymore. It definitely sets in mind why I made some of the choices that I did. And your Army experience, I was married to somebody in the military who was very much in that, like, it doesn't matter if I've taken this vow. It doesn't, like, there's no outlet for people in the military. I first want to say that. That's why so many people turn to drugs or other types of addictions, alcoholism. You can hide certain drugs, so you can still be addicted in the military. You might not be able to smoke weed or do heroin, but there are some things that you can absolutely do to fill that craving for, your drug addiction, or the alcoholism, or, I cannot tell you how many people I knew who went into the sex industry, and there is no shame here in the sex industry. Everybody has to take their path. And I know Joshua mentioned that as well, but this is not to shame. But there are so many broken people on this planet, no matter what your addiction is. I was on the receiving end of a marriage where the man cheated on me 80 times. And that was not just all the same person. Very young age, and had like a checklist of 500 women that he had slept with. And it continued well into his other marriages. But, being on the other side of that, I turned to my own running away. I either became very, very focused on being career driven because I was a woman in the military, or I turn to my own addiction. And you mentioned that cyclical, like on again, off again. I've done that with alcohol. I've done that with that. Alcohol was my favorite way to disconnect from what was happening. So, thank you for bringing that to, to us as well. And just, wow, that is an incredible journey. And it took years, even from that pivotal moment of you being in that room and having a person stand in front of you and bring a message of love and power and support. It still took you years. Can you give us a little bit of insight on what, I know you were a man of God and you still are a man of God, and that journey, did you seek listening to, different power people and whatnot? Did you use any groups? Did you go to, like AA or NA or anything along those lines to help you through that? What was that experience for you?
Yeah, I had been around AA. My mom dated alcoholics. My dad was an alcoholic. I don't ascribe to being an alcoholic because that, from my perspective, puts me in victim mode. But one of the things I found from being involved in that, and I probably should have been at Nymphomaniacs Anonymous, frankly, that probably would have been the best thing for me. But what they all had in common, and what worked for me, was getting around a space where there was no judgment. Mm-hmm. And this is one of the things that turned me off from my church experiences, for example, was just an insane amount of judgment. Huge turnoff. And so probably a lot of your listeners know exactly what I'm talking about, right? So I found that commonality, and I wound up getting involved with virtual men's groups.
Okay.
And we actually run them now. And we've been running them regularly for the last year and a half. And this is just a way, again, to come to a space where you can bare your soul. Is that, I find anyway, if you look at all of those organizations, all of those experiences tie down to one thing: is tell the truth.
Yes.
Tell the truth. And so this technology and this idea of programming, this idea of, well, that different components need to be able to feed together in order to operate and create a fully working system or software application. It's the same with us, I find. Right. The moment I got into isolation, everything went sideways. The moment I stepped into a room with, I don't want to even necessarily say people that really, really cared, but people that genuinely wanted to also step in the room and tell the truth, right? It was just this convergence of truth telling that then began to unlock doors rapidly. And what I've given you here is such a tiny sliver of the story, right? I've tried to give you the highlights over the last, I'm 44 years old. I'm sitting here today in the best physical health I've been in practically my entire life, because I was killing my body early. Thank God it got restored. My family's in the greatest place it's ever been. I could only have imagined, what if I grew up in a family like this? So my business in a place. So all of these things now in a place, and I definitely attributed that to not remaining isolated, not staying in the dark, right? And when we did this podcast just the other day, I'm sharing my veterans experience. A lot of people understand, like, this is mental health stuff. Like, this is basic 101 soul level, you versus you right up here. And a lot of these things ultimately lead to suicide. And I know that when I was in my darkest, there were times and places where, I believe this is providentially set, but people would come and kind of spark some light or arc some light into my mess. And that would allow me to then begin to look around and start to get honest. So, and that's where most of us are at, right? We're just frustrated at times when we're in that pit. And then because it's all up here and that game just plays over and over and over again, it's like a prison.
Yeah,
right? It's a mental
really
prison. Yeah.
And it's a prison of this never-ending labyrinth that we continually run through, and we think we're right there at the end, and then we lock ourselves back in and we get trapped right back in it. And it's brutal. It's hard. But if you're willing to, as you said, be truthful, because the truth will set you free. If you're willing to be honest. Even if you can't be honest with yourself, start off with being honest with a therapist, or find a group that, allows you to be honest, and start setting yourself free. You mentioned the unity in community, and you have communities that people can go to. I'm not sure if it's specific to male experiences or not, but, I found unity in communities on Facebook when I wasn't ready to actually be in front of somebody to be honest with the stuff that I was carrying. But I would really love for you to explore that just a little bit more. And of course, we want to hear all about your personal communities. If you want to take just the next few minutes to give listeners, where they can find you, how they can go and find their own community. And even maybe you've dropped several nuggets in our conversation as well, but even drop a couple more nuggets, and then we'll call the show a wrap.
Sounds wonderful. Thank you, Lisa. Yeah, I love that you brought that up. I have a huge heart for veterans. I'm right here. I'm off of Fort Campbell in Clarksville, Tennessee. So
I lived there.
Right. Go Screaming Eagles. Hey, whether you loved it or hated it. I mean,
it's beautiful there.
It is, and it's growing. And you're right. There's not enough support. There's so much red tape. I'm excited about the potential of where we're headed now. So the community is a big thing. Back in 2008, I was given a vision of this concept called Go Christ. That's our premier fellowship experience. That is men, women, young, old, just a desire. Anybody that has a connection to the idea of Christ, or a restoration of a relationship with their Father in heaven through Christ, something like that. That's that channel. And then there's Men's Weekly, and it is definitely not a man or woman only thing. All of these, what works is what I'm trying to say. But everyone, and depending on where they're at in their journey, may need a different entry point.
Okay.
And that's why these all exist. Meant to preface with that. So Men's Weekly is a weekly experience where we do a morning and evening on Saturday. Winning in business, it doesn't matter. It's just come show up, tell the truth. And we do it face-to-face on Zoom, which has been an amazing experience, especially with everybody being, working remote. And, I can't get help because I can't drive there. Well, good. Get on the Zoom session. Just sit where you are. Come as you are. Show up, tell the truth, and see what happens. See what gets unlocked. And those are our two primary experiences. And we're getting ready to launch a Step into Power experience, which is something more geared toward the entrepreneurs. Because I think that this is kind of like the final pivot in these days, where those that know that there's power being activated on the inside of them are going to pivot to inviting others on the journey into power, right? From one angle or another. And ultimately, all these are going to carry kind of the same message, right? So it doesn't matter whether you come join, what we're doing, or you go join something that's been on your heart. I mean, heck, I the old the men's club. I'm not just the president. I'm also a client.
Right.
I also participate in many other men's groups. And one in particular that I love is every Tuesday morning, we get together for a session called Build. And it's, again, there's lots of them out there. But the thing is, you just got to be willing to tell the truth. And then go show up and see what happens. Because you're going to find there's that fear and there's that apprehension and there's all these thoughts. And what are they going to think? Who cares what they're going to think? A really tough time. I always wanted to compare to other people.
Right.
Oh, well, they're doing that. Or even when we get in the fellowship or in our group experiences, like, that comes up from time to time. And so that's something to be battled, but understand that there's really just a war against yourself. Because if you can compete against yesterday, like I've been doing these last few years, and just get honest about it, you're going to fall short. So what?
Right.
Good. Get back up, fall forward. It's like, we're taking the line, and you don't understand that. You keep pressing forward. Oh, you got a broken leg? Great. Keep walking. Yep. You'll be all right.
Rub dirt on it.
There's a mental toughness that has to be developed. Yeah. And because we've been programmed here for this, I don't know, probably the last 60 years, maybe, since we had TV, to it faster. You know, I've got 7 screens over here right now. Like, dear God in heaven, what am I going to do with 7 screens? I know what I would have done back in those dark days, but now I get to use it as a tool to broadcast light, and that's what we're after here. And you can head over to joshuaallenjones.com if you want to connect. We've got all of the social media stuff. Connect with me personally. We do have an offer. So for all the listeners, if you want to experience this hour of power, it's actually called the Hour of Power Experience, aka yes, I sell hope. Until we get this invitation to step into power, set up, and broadcast, it's a $297 opportunity to get one-on-one with me to actually break down all the domains of your dominion. We look at your form, which is basically your body, your mental makeup, and all of that packaged into who you are physically. And then we look at your faith, and then we look at your family. As we explore those things, we uncover all kinds of stuff. I mean, everybody that's come through the Hour of Power experience has walked out of there on fire, clear, understanding at the very least what's the next step I'm going to take, and understanding what's that roadblock sitting up here right now. And usually it's completely destroyed by the time they step out. Now, whether they pick it back up again on their journey, again, not mine to judge. Right. But we stand there in the gap and we allow you to do that. So if that's a $297 experience that we'll give your listeners totally free if they'll shoot that message.
Well, thank you. That's amazing. Yeah. And just really quickly, we are phoenixes. We are going to experience challenges and we are going to continue to rise if we allow ourselves. And that Hour of Power can give you the tools that you need when you need to rise again. So even if you fall off the bandwagon, you still will be empowered with the tools that you have learned along the way that you can use to rise again. So thank you so much, Joshua, for being here with us. This has been absolutely incredible. Thank you for sharing your journey. I appreciate it. I know I love listening to people when they're in their most vulnerable. So thank you so much for being vulnerable and sharing that with us. And I do hope that our listeners here do get something from listening to your episode. I will have all of your contact information in the show notes, whether it's on YouTube, Spotify, Apple iTunes. So listeners will be able to go into the show notes and get your links to reach out to you directly. They can always contact me at rabbitholereflectionspodcast@gmail.com if they also want me to connect them to you if they just for some reason can't get connected to you. So again, thank you all so much for being here. This has been Rabbit Hole Reflections. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you for joining us on another journey down the rabbit hole. If this conversation resonated with you, be a light in someone's darkness by sharing this episode. Connect with our community on Facebook at Rabbit Hole Reflections and catch our video episodes on YouTube at Rabbit Hole Reflections Podcast. All resources mentioned today are linked in the show notes. Remember, we all face our own rabbit holes. It's not the falling that defines us, but how we emerge and what we bring back. Until next time, remember that even in our darkest moments, wisdom awaits. I'm Lisa Van Slyke, and this has been Rabbit Hole Reflections.